You're watching InTechnology. This episode is one in a series with innovative companies who are part of the Intel Capital portfolio. In these conversations, we'll explore the key areas of technology Intel Capital invests in to shape the future of compute.
Hi, I'm Camille Morhart, host of InTechnology podcast. And today, as part of the Intel Capital series, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and its role in gaming and game development. We have a very interesting guest today to have the conversation. I'm going to co-host with Srini Ananth, who is a managing director at Intel Capital, and he focuses on deep tech, cloud infrastructure, and AI applications companies. Welcome to the podcast, Srini, and will you please introduce our guest?
Thanks, Camille. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to have our guest, Florin. He's the VP of Operations and Corporate Development at Inworld. And Inworld is a company that is the AI-driven gaming platform for powering NPCs as well as virtual characters in a host of other verticals. It was founded by Ilya, Michael, and Kylan, who are working together at Google and DeepMind and have a long history of working on conversational AI and conversational speech platforms. Florin himself was previously working at the intersection of technology, media, and telecom. He's worked at Sony Gaming, and he's been an investor himself, investing in startups in the music industry. He's also been in technology, media, and telecom banking at Credit Suisse. And Florin, in his spare time, is also an amateur music producer, and he's a competitive tennis player. Welcome to the podcast, Florin.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, to jump right in, Srini, you said NPC very casually, and I'm just going to say, I would say a year ago, or at least 2 years ago, if you had done that, we would have to pause and say, okay, let's define what NPC is. I actually think that's common in lexicon right now, and it's non-playable character. I think actually most people know what that is, even down to the acronym. I'm curious, Florin, first of all, what is it, in case somebody isn't familiar? And then why do we all know what it is now?
NPC is a non-player or non-playable character. Essentially, in a game, it's the other players in the game that you can't control. And I think it actually became very popular when the movie Free Guy came out of Ryan Reynolds, because the whole concept was you have NPCs in this world that are just doing whatever they're programmed to do. And one day they realize almost like they have free will, and they try to escape the confines of this virtual world that they live in. That was actually the exact same time that Inworld was started. And I think we tapped into a lot of this media frenzy as well. And then, of course, everyone's playing games, whether it's on their phones or on console and on computers at home. And everyone has interacted with an NPC and had these kind of interactions where the NPC runs into the same wall like over and over again, or responds in the same scripted dialogue over and over again. So there's a lot of memes now on Instagram and TikTok of these NPC recreations where it's like actual real people acting like NPCs. So overall, it became a big part of culture. And of course, that's how we started our business, focusing on NPCs, but we've expanded far beyond that now with broader AI tools for game development.
Tell us briefly what the company does.
Essentially, what we built is an AI engine for games. It's a series of AI components, tools, and infrastructure that allows game developers to create content and develop games more efficiently without sacrificing quality, but at the same time, create novel new gameplay mechanics that make games more fun, more immersive, more engaging, and more personalized for the player.
Yeah, I think you said make games better and make better games.
Exactly, yeah. Both sides of the spectrum there, yeah.
How does AI, or is it generative AI specifically, or large language models, what are you tapping into to actually improve the mechanics and the NPCs in the game?
It's really a wide spectrum. We definitely use LLMs and generative models themselves to create new content, but there's also other AI and ML models that we're using across the entire stack. What we call these things really are primitives. We have input models, which is, for example, speech recognition, taking in text, taking in state ingestion from the actual game itself. Where are the players? What colors are the different players in terms of their outfits or their HP levels, whatever really is in that game state, taking that in. And then we also have output models. So for example, speech synthesis, text generation, which is the more traditional LLMs, which are very popular at the moment, but also some pretty rudimentary actions, animations, really expanding what is being produced. And then in the center between the input models and the output models, we have systems. So to give you a sense of one of the easiest systems to explain is, for example, control systems. So making sure that the content going into the models and coming out from the models is safe, is in line with the IP that is being used to create these games, making sure that the brand safety is there. So those are some of the controls that we're applying, in addition to making sure that characters don't go off on tangents about topics that they're not supposed to be discussing.
Are you collecting player data also, and then training models or training future game development engines on their actions or preferences?
It depends on the engagement that we have with the studio. Some studios don't want to allow that. Some studios are like, we want the highest quality possible. So for us to improve the quality, we need to take in some of the interactions that are being had, figuring out how are these interactions trending, and using that information to actually fine-tune those models, improve their quality, reduce costs, and overall ensure a higher and better experience for the end player.
What is your take on whether we're having this centralized training and improving, taking in a collective input and then improving these models versus a distributed learning kind of a model, or maybe even just customized AI at the edge for an individual person and then retaining that on their individual device?
We're pretty flexible here. It really depends, again, on what the goals are of the game studio. I think naturally, we believe that the overall industry will move to having everything happen on device. That helps decrease latency. It helps improve performance. It helps reduce cost. You're playing on your Switch, you're in a tunnel, you lose internet connection. You don't want the game to stop working or the characters to stop saying things. And that's really the natural progression. In the near term, there will be some quality degradation just because we can't put these like massive models on device just yet. But over time, we really think that those problems will go away, and then games will be consumed with AI in the same way that we're playing games now offline.
Will it be going back and forth? You be online at certain times and then offline, downloading portions of the game ahead of time or as it goes? And will it be going back and forth, or are you looking at multiplayer that would require online presence, right?
Yeah, for sure. From our side, we can do it in a hybrid approach for sure. There may be scenarios where you don't want to be processing things on device because that hardware is being used for other parts of the game. And there it's easier just to tap into doing things through the cloud. But of course, again, some of the scenarios I mentioned where you're losing internet connection, you can definitely switch over to on-device models. And maybe the quality is a bit lower for the 5 to 10 minutes that you have to be on device. But overall, we believe the quality will trend in a pretty similar direction where there won't be any sort of noticeable differences between how that is actually being processed.
So what are you feeding into, say, a non-playable character like training? What kind of inputs are you providing? And then how is that able to take more real-time input from somebody actually playing the game and then modifying their behavior, the character behavior, based on the person playing the game?
So all our models were designed and optimized for gaming use cases where conversation needs to be fun, engaging, immersive. And if you look about these pretty large, traditional, foundational large language models, they were built to serve any use case imaginable, right? Whether it's a customer call center or a student asking for help on their homework. So those conversations sounds like ChatGPT hooked up to a character. What we're doing is really tapping into engaging conversation in game scenarios and other scenarios, looking at what that conversation actually, how that conversation unfolds, what's being said, and what makes those conversations engaging, and using that data to train these models to respond in a way that is engaging, that is fun, that wants you to keep on exploring and building a relationship with these characters or whatever the context may be. And that is very different from a lot of the traditional enterprise use cases that we're seeing become really prevalent these days. And then in terms of how you can actually adjust character behavior based on the inputs from the player, we're actually able to pass through information in real time. For example, let's say you're a wizard in this game where you went and did this quest before interacting with the player, with the character. The character can take that information in, pass it through, and respond in ways that make sense based on how the character was programmed. An onboarding character will have very different goals and motivations than, for example, a villager whose villager just attacked by evil pirates. And they should be able to respond to players in a way that makes sense for their role in that particular game. So we're able to take in all that context and spit out behavior and dialogue and actions that's in line with the background of the character.
One of the reasons that I think I enjoy conversations with my friends is they have a memory of a prior conversation and they check in again.
Exactly. These characters have memory, they have knowledge. If you come back the next day, they'll be able to understand what happened the day before, just like you and I would, and continue that natural conversation. This hasn't been realized yet, but one of my favorite use cases would be, imagine you have the first version of the game and then you release a sequel. You should be able to engage with them and they'll remember all the adventures you had the first time around or what you did in that game. And it makes a very natural transition between the first game, the second game, the third game, whatever it may be. And now in the games industry, we are seeing a lot of IP creating massive next generation games for using that same IP, including a lot of the ones that we're working on right now.
Can you tell us a little bit about the game mechanics that you're enhancing or helping developers enhance?
This studio on this platform called Playroom launched a game called Death by AI. And the whole mechanics of this game is basically you and a bunch of other friends are given a particular prompt or a situation. For example, I was playing the other day and it told me, you're disintegrating Marty in Back to the Future. What do you do? Basically, everyone submits their own idea of what the next step is. I submitted, I think, for something like, I drink like a regeneration potion or whatever it was. We all submit those ideas, and the AI will basically play out the scenario for us and tell us, did we survive based on that idea? And you'll go around and one person survives, the rest don't. And that's a really novel game mechanic. It's perhaps like pretty simple. It's like an early implementation, but that game got like hundreds of millions of hours of gameplay and users. And it just shows how like AI can actually bring the player into the game itself. It's non-scripted. You're actually deciding what happens. And it's actually also creating a social interaction with you and your friends. So that's an entirely novel gameplay mechanic that wasn't really possible before AI. And then we have a bunch of other examples. For example, we worked on a project with Ubisoft where you're talking to one of these characters and you actually have to build a relationship, a rapport with them, get them to trust you for you to unlock more information, to unlock more knowledge, more quests, and be able to actually unlock new parts of the game or explore the game. And before, that could probably be done in a way where if you ask this particular question or you hit this buzzword, then you get this information. But this can be done in a much more natural way, very similar to how, imagine you were actually playing that game in real life and your job was to get information. You probably wouldn't give me that information until you felt comfortable with me and trusted me. And that similar mechanic can be actually implemented in games. Those are just two examples of like how games are changing. And there's many more from our customers and other studios out there who are early adopters of AI.
Just to get a little bit more philosophical for a moment, if you'll pardon it, what impact do you think gaming has had on the evolution of the human mind?
Especially the way gaming has evolved, it's become a natural outlet for a lot of folks who maybe are not having the same kind of engagement and social interaction that everyone else may be having. For example, right now with games like League of Legends, you have so many people playing these games, connecting, building friendships. You see all these online videos of folks who are meeting the person they play Call of Duty with for the past 10 years for the first time in person, or they invited them to their wedding. And I think gaming has really helped create these connections between people, which really gets to the core of what makes us unique as humans is social engagement, social interaction, building relationships, building bonds. And that's really what I think makes games engaging. What games taps into are those relationships between people. So I think I can see the argument, for example, people are spending too much time playing games. But on the other hand, there are a lot of folks who don't have an opportunity to have that engagement for whatever reasons, or are not, maybe not confident enough to be able to go out and make friends, and they're able to go home, play games, meet people, expand their horizons, and somewhat have the same interaction. So I'm curious to get Srini's thoughts on that as well. But I think from my side, it's overall a net benefit and allows folks to build these bonds that otherwise may not be possible.
We are starting to see gaming being used in some of the therapies as well, right? There are companies that have been using gaming in treating neurodivergent disorders. There are companies trying to investigate how it can be used in other mental health disorders. We're starting to see some of the benefits of gaming when used right. And this is something we always worry about when it comes to our kids, like how much time should you spend in gaming, how addictive it can get, and then what are the sort of benefits. And I think given the right atmosphere and given the right sort of game, it can be very helpful. I remember building these home PCs and gaming for 5 to 6 hours, and at least I knew when to pull back. So that's one of those risks of gaming is how long can you spend and how much time can you spend. But then there are all these other benefits about being able to connect with people, being able to actually share some of what you're going through. And within this sort of guardrails, this is where we at Inworld, they do a great job of making sure that the content is always safe for kids to use. And so that is one of the things that we always have to worry about. How can we use AI to keep some of these non-safe content off of the gaming platforms? I think if we can take care of that, I do see a lot of benefits.
It's interesting if you guys both talked about human-to-human connection that's made through this sort of digital platform that wouldn't otherwise be made. But also if NPCs are becoming more and more engaging, then essentially people are talking with large language models or other generative AI models that are becoming, they have their persistent memory and they're becoming more and more interested in you and retaining the information and customizing information for you. Are we turning into the Her model of the movie where I don't need friends because I have not even other humans playing the game with me, but NPCs that are engaging in an interesting way? And I don't want to even attempt to make a judgment call. I'm just curious, like, how do you think that is going to affect humanity or communities or people who are so deeply engaged in it?
As it relates to gaming and games, NPCs for the most part are, I don't want to say peripheral, but they're side elements to the story. In some games, they're more important than others, where you have open worlds and you have to explore. But for the most part, you're being pushed along a narrative that the game developers created, and your goal is to go through that narrative. We're using AI for the NPC use case in particular to make the rest of the game more realistic and more immersive. From my side, I think there are certain use cases where if you just go into an open world and talk to NPCs all day, I don't see necessarily that much value in that. But in the way we're thinking about it, it's really about complementing the existing game narrative and making those games more compelling, more engaging, and allowing these games to feel more believable versus just having a chatbot conversation back and forth, which I think has been a use case that we've seen a lot of so far, because the quality bar is much lower when it's just text being exchanged back and forth and maybe a picture that you uploaded of the character that you're talking to. I don't see necessarily a lot of value in the chatbot path, continuing to invest in the chatbot path, because that's novel and it's interesting now, but longer term, it's really not that engaging, and I don't think rewards the kind of behavior that we want to be rewarding. So from my side, I actually think the impact won't be as great as it's being made out to be at the moment. I think it's just where we are at a point in time where tech is new, and this is what's been popularized because it's low-hanging fruit. But over time, as the quality improves, we're going to see much more compelling use cases that actually, I think, complement our life and complement games.
So Srini, this stuff all sounds really interesting and compelling. For a gamer, why in the world is Intel investing in it?
Intel Capital, we've been investing in some of the foundational technologies such as speech and natural language processing for, I would say, probably close to 12, 13 years or even 14 years at this point. And we have also been enabling high-end gaming desktops. Intel processors actually power a lot of the gaming desktops. And so we've always been interested in the gaming industry as a whole, and we've been enabling the foundational technologies in that space. For us, it was a confluence of a couple of things. We had invested in Ilya Michael's first startup, which was Stick to It, and that was later renamed to API.ai. That was the first Android speech assistant. They had over 50 million users, and then later on it became a developer platform. And after that acquisition by Google, it ended up being used by a few million developers. So here was a team that continued to work in the speech and natural language space. Along with it, they also spent a lot of time in generative models and the next wave of LLMs. And so when this team came back out and said they're going to focus on gaming, it was but natural for us to find a way to partner with them. We looked at it as this is a platform to power NPCs, but more than that, power virtual characters in a variety of settings. It could be in other industries too. And this was just predating that LLM wave. But the other part of it was we invest in a lot of B2B developer platforms, and we look at it as a way of enabling millions of developers to go and build the tools and to build games faster, cheaper, and get to market really early. And I think what has been amazing is to see the second piece, or in fact, there are two other pieces which have been added. One is powering the NPCs is one thing, but there are all these other components that Inworld has developed over the last 2-3 years, where they're also part of the game development flow. It's not just the production piece, but the game development, the production, and also the infrastructure. A lot of the AAA studios, they probably have the infrastructure to support millions of users, but the smaller studios don't have that. And so Inworld now has this third component where they can power those games and provide what we are talking about in terms of inference costs and how do you actually serve this with the lowest latency. And part of that is the on-device piece. So 2 years back, we didn't talk about AI PC. That has become a new element now, right? How can Intel, with its AI core, enable on-device gaming? How can we reduce some of the costs for these game developers? Because if you can offload a lot of that AI models to the edge, you reduce the cost of running the game. It is also productive for the game developers. It's also a great experience for the players. So from all of these angles, I think Inworld has been amazing as a partner. They're one of a very close partner of Intel's client computing group, and we've really had a wonderful time working with them.
What is like one of the hottest topics in gaming right now? What are people, developers, from a developer perspective, what are they arguing over or really excited about right now?
From the conversations that we're having with studios, so assuming that's representative of the broader industry, there are 2 or 3 main topics that kind of come up relatively often. The first one is the cost component. Every API call or a call to a model has an associated cost. So typically what happens is you do the math and you say, I'm going to have millions of players interacting with characters or making requests to the model. I'm going to go bankrupt in day one. And it's largely a false belief because costs don't actually scale linearly. they may be growing linearly in the very beginning while we get more data and understand how the use case is actually playing out and how this engagement is shaping. But then there's lots of things you can do on the back end to optimize those models, to fine tune them, to improve their performance, to use smaller models and basically help costs taper off. The second component, which I think we've spoken quite a lot about already, is the on-device piece, where basically the cost conversation will largely go away if you're able to serve everything on device. So that's the first big topic. And those are all things that Inworld already does and then offers to our customers. The second piece is around brand and content safety. And again, something that we've spoken about. Are the characters or the dialogue or the output of these models going to be unsafe? Obviously, we do checks for that. But also more importantly, is it going to be on brand? If you think about companies like Disney or NBCU, where they have all these characters, they have all this lore, if a Disney princess talks about the US election, that's going to be really, first off, just a really weird experience, but it's going to break the immersion for that particular child who's engaging with that Disney princess. And that's like the worst thing that could happen to any IP holder. So it's also about doing robust checks to make sure that everything that is being spit out by these models is in line with how they should be if it was being controlled very finely on what they were saying. And the third piece, I'd say, is probably IP ownership and just IP security, basically making sure that, one, games can cost like $1 billion to make, and they take 6 or 7 years depending on the scale of the game. And a lot of that information, if it gets leaked, very similar to a movie script or something else, it's going to ruin a lot of basically all the investment that's been made into that game to keep things confidential and then allow the players to experience it. So making sure that there's no IP leakage, and also who owns the data that's going into the models coming out. And with Inworld, with all our customers, we own none of the data that's going in and none of the data that's going out. It's all owned by the studios. The IP belongs where it belongs. And we're more so just focused on ensuring the highest quality for the end user, for the end player, and making sure that all that IP is secure and not being leaked through our SLAs and enterprise level security.
What do you think is next on the horizon? Are we going to be living in this Gen AI kind of new tools available to us for the foreseeable future? Or do you think there's some other thing that's going to crop up to make a huge difference in gaming?
In gaming in particular, I actually think a lot of use cases that we're going to see be like the gold standard for how to use AI haven't even actually been discovered yet. Like, that's one of the most exciting things to me as a gamer and also as building this technology on a daily basis, is like, what will it be used for in games that makes someone laugh and makes them have the best gaming experience that they've ever had? So from that perspective, like we have some ideas, like the ones I mentioned so far are pretty interesting. And I think those are easy to understand and they're kind of like the first step. But I actually think a lot of the use cases for AI within games are still being determined now. And it was up to the developers who have been building games for a long time to figure out, like, what do I actually want to enable with this game that I can now do because of AI that wasn't before possible? And then seeing how that actually plays out when the players are engaging. So TBD on what that killer use cases are. I think we're already seeing some of them, but that to me is like probably the most exciting thing that I see coming. And there's other stuff, as I mentioned earlier, like on-device model serving, which are going to be a gateway to allow us, for all of us, to experience AI in games by reducing costs and improving latency and everything else. But those are all steps on the path to actually enabling players to have an amazing gameplay experience.
Is the goal with gaming pretty much universally to immerse in a different world and be a different character, a different person? Or is there any kind of interest or evolution toward a crossover between your actual world and your gaming world?
They definitely can, and I think we're already seeing one customer in a pretty interesting use case where it starts to blend. It's the character calling you on your phone and you talking to the character that way and then figuring out when you actually log back in. So there's definitely a blend, but I do think one of the amazing parts about games is having this alternate reality and explore and build relationships, and allows you to maybe be even the person that you would want to be but can't because there are no dragons in this world and on Earth or whatever it may be. So I still think games will be largely separate, but they will become more realistic, more engaging, more fun, and I think that's overall a positive for everyone.
With some of the most recent advances in gesture recognition and emotion recognition in AI, are we going to start to see games incorporate that into customized responses based on people's actual mood?
You can get away doing some of that already just based on the content of what's being said. If I say, I hate you, I'm going to be able to understand the overall intent, but it could be like, oh my God, I hate you. That is where the difference comes in. And there is some benefit to being able to detect the tone of voice as well as the context of the broader discussion. and taking that in so the player knows how to adequately respond and knows what the impact should be on itself, whether it's through a relationship meter or something else. So that's actually going to be very useful. Like I said, some of that stuff can already be hacked because of the actual content of what's being said and the context, but it's only going to get better. And then that's the kind of stuff that we're actually going to use quite probably intensely.
What I would love to hear is, when do we start to see some of these experiences? Can you talk a little bit about the development cycles for games like this? And when should people start to expect? Because there's this expectation in the Gen AI space of everything getting to market very quick. But that's happening in these sort of consumer apps. But the people's expectation is the cycles move so fast that if you don't see a use case, oh, that whole space is dead. But as we realize in certain verticals, whether it's drug discovery or gaming, it is not that quick because there are tool chains and there are a lot of processes and all those things that have to get integrated. So I'd love to hear your take on what does it take for this, the first game with AI to be seen in the hands of a user?
I think it depends on how you're defining game. There are already some examples like the one I gave earlier with Death by AI, where that's a game. It's not a AAA game, but it's out. It's being interacted with by players. People are loving it. It's blowing up. It's definitely engaging, and it is a fun game. So that one was obviously very quick to market. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the AAA productions, which in a typical world, as I mentioned, can cost more than $1 billion with the budget and marketing and everything else, can take more than 5 years to make. And those games will take a while to come to market. All those design decisions are being done now, and how to implement AI and how to test AI, because it will take so long to actually integrate it in a way that doesn't degrade the quality of these games, because that's really what makes them stand out. So those will take a bit longer. And then you have the middle section, which depending on how you define it, could be indie games, could be AA games, and those will maybe take a year or two to come out. And we already have some early examples of partners like NetEase Games and Niantic, smaller games, demos, but these are like the first touch points that people are actually having, in a way like warming them up for what's to come. At the same time, giving the developers like very interesting insights into what's working, what's not, so that they can integrate that into the game. And when the game finally launches, hopefully it's, a very fun, engaging experience for the player.
What was the first game you ever played, Florin?
The first game, to be honest, I don't remember the first game, but the game I played the most was definitely the one Srini mentioned at the beginning, Empire Earth. It's a real-time strategy game. I think it came out in 2001. And my dad, my brother, and I would just have these like massive LAN parties. We're just all in our own rooms in the separate edges of the house, building up like cities from the Stone Age all the way to like the Nano Age, where you have like laser guns, and you basically, we would end the night at 2, 3 a.m. and my dad would always win. And yeah, that's probably the one where I've logged the most hours, but it's quite old at this point, so I have to look for the next one.
Thank you, Florin. Really interesting conversation. Florin Radu is a VP at Inworld, which is a platform that allows developers of games to actually use AI to make the games more interesting, more compelling, have the NPCs come alive, and make for more interesting game mechanics. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And Srini, thank you for joining me to co-host from Intel Capital, managing partner there. Appreciate your really fascinating questions today.
Thanks for having us, Camille, and thanks for Florin for joining us.
Never miss an episode of InTechnology by following us here on YouTube or wherever you get your audio podcasts.
The views and opinions expressed are those of the guests and author and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Intel Corporation.